Hey guys, welcome out this morning to Revolution. We're going to continue with part 8 of looking at the King James Bible debate recap with Stephen Boyce. And so this is the beginning of their third video. They do 5 videos examining the debate between Nathan Cravat and Mitch Knupp. And so I'm just going to get straight into it. Let's hear what these guys have to say.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for part 3 of the King James Bible debate recap with Dr. Stephen Boyce and myself, Nathan Cravat from the Recast. And we have done over 3.5 hours, and we made it through the introduction and first question. So we're going to jump right into the second question and see what Mr. Mitch Knupp has to bring to us tonight from question 2. But first, let me read the second question. It is, which Bible on the market today are the words of God or closest to the words of God? Which Bible on the market today are the words of God or closest to the words of God?
It's a pretty basic question, and it's a question that people should be able to answer without waffling on. If someone said to me, "So where are the words of God today?" I said, "Well, the words of God are found in the King James version, and the Hebrew Old Testament Masoretic text and the Greek Textus Receptus is perfectly rendered in English here, and this is akin." It's a relative to the originals because all it is the original wording carried across through preservation, through the Greek and the Hebrew into English today. It's pretty basic. And these guys are like all over the place with where their Bibles are. It's in the Nestle Aland United Bible Society text, but every now and then you're going to have to go to the apparatus when you disagree with the reading, and so it's sort of like the Scrabble set. If I said, "So where's the definitive English dictionary?" It's, "Oh, well, the Oxford," But imagine if I just pointed to another dictionary and said, "Well, it's in there plus in a Scrabble set," because that's like what the apparatus is. It's just a whole bunch of variants, and that they can range from deliberate corruptions to describable mistakes to just errors, blunders, parablepsis, homoioteuton, similar beginnings, similar endings. Um, that they can cause these words to be changed, because if you're missing a whole bunch of words in the middle of a verse, you have to try to fudge that to make it make sense, and so you're changing words, you're making words, you're creating new sentences and things like that. So they put all that sort of trash into the apparatus, and then they say you can go to the apparatus and sort of choose your own ending, choose your own beginning, choose your own definitions. And so that's where their Bible is. They don't have a definitive Bible. A lot of people think, "Oh, well, it's an Nestle Aland United Bible Society text." They're not saying that. They're saying it can be found in there, plus in some manuscripts. Perhaps if we find another manuscript in a cave somewhere, we can add that as well, and that might change the readings, and so their text is forever morphing and forever not settled, where our text is settled. Our text has been received by the church. We're not recreating a text. We're just receiving it. It's like a baton that's been passed on through the ages, through the generations. We've just received it and gone, yeah, that's the word of God. Where these guys are like, okay, we'll have to fix this. And they're sitting down and they're trying to tinker with something that was already perfected, and they're actually trying to rebuild it. They're trying to rebuild it from scratch. It's ridiculous.
Please excuse the English misuse there. That was Mr. Cody Zorn's responsibility. Here we go.
It's interesting that he brings up the point about King James. That poor man's been maligned more than anybody except the Virgin Mary and the Apostle Peter. King James is looked at by the detractors of the King James Bible as a pervert, a sodomite, I don't know if you know it or not, but Jamestown was named after James in 1607. Do you think people in 1607 are going to name a city after a man who was a pervert?
No, sir. No.
His son Charles I, who became king after James and was king until he was executed in 1649, North and South Carolina are named after King Charles. Carolus, Latin, Carolus, that's where Carolina came from. Do you think people are going to name two states after a man who was a pervert because Charles was looked at as the same? No, I'm asking you folks. See, what has happened to people today, they have become internet believers instead of Bible believers.
Stop right there. Where does the Bible talk about King James's life at all? What is that supposed to mean? So if somebody...
I mean, the whole concept, you internet believers or Bible believers, it's like, that's a pretty dumb quotation. I wouldn't gel with that. There's lots of really good information on the internet. I remember when I was exposing Hillsong. Now, a lot of people are looking at Hillsong at the moment. The leader of Hillsong, Brian Houston, has been officially arrested here in Australia, and charges are getting pressed against him. He faces up to 5 years jail. Now, I was pushing for this back for many years, since 2007. If you want to watch my video on that, you can go through my videos. I've got one recently on Hillsong. And so the thing is, with that information, what was my point there? I hate it when I sort of rabbit trail and forget what I was actually going on about. So why did I bring up Hillsong and Brian Houston? Because sometimes these themes for me are so big and so important that I'm emotionally attached to these, exposing, a pedophile, and then exposing people who cover for pedophiles, and having been rejected by nearly every Christian in Australia as, a psychopath and all the rest of it, who just hates Hillsong. And I've pushed for this for years and years and years, and then finally it's like, the guy's getting arrested. So anyway, I remember my point. So anyway, I was sitting with a pastor, and this is before it became news. Now, I'd talked to the Royal Commission. Royal Commission is probably the highest the highest judicial law system that we have in Australia. A Royal Commission is huge, and so it's like a special case scenario. So they did a Royal Commission into child sex abuse. I was conversing with the Royal Commission, gave them all the information that I had about the cover-ups of 6 rapes of little boys that we knew of. And after the Royal Commission, they found out there was 14 that Brian had covered up for. And so we knew he was guilty. He said basically in court that he covered up for his dad. And we were just like, when is this guy going to go to jail? when is he going to get charged, arrested? Well, if it was me, I would have been in and out of jail, But this guy, he's real good friends with the Prime Minister here. The Prime Minister was going to invite Brian Houston to a Trump dinner, and then he last minute cancelled, and then he lied about it on television. This is a Christian Prime Minister here, lied about it on television, and then Brian Houston said, yeah, that happened. And then the Prime Minister had to backtrack and say, well, sorry, did the Monica Lewinsky thing. Anyway, I'm digressing here big time. This is a whole separate issue. When I sat down with a pastor about a month before it became international headlines that Hillsong were being investigated for this type of thing, I was sitting with the pastor, and he was telling me to stop posting things about Hillsong on the internet and on Facebook. And I said, look, the thing is, you don't really understand much about the whole Hillsong thing. I know lots about it. Pretty much a hub of, information, giving to people all this stuff that was given to me about Hillsong by the former secretary of the Assemblies of God, Philip Powell, who ran Christian Witness Ministries until he passed away. And so I used to run Philip's website. We had a lot to do with each other. And so I sat down with this pastor, and he said, you can't believe everything on the internet, Nick. And I'm just there going, um, it's like looking at. I felt like I was looking at the sports, scores. Like, oh, this team won by 13 points. I'm like, look, it says in the paper here, and people going, you can't believe everything in the newspapers. You just sort of like, yeah, but it's factual. Like, what they're going to get that wrong. I understand that there is bias in media, and people can put whatever they want on the internet. But at the end of the day, there is fact and there is truth, and I think it's just it's an insult to someone's intellect when they're sort of like, you know, uh, oh, you found that on the internet. I mean, I find lots of books actually, printed books wrong because it's just a different medium. You've just got um, a printed book. Sure, there might be, people might have gone over it for spell checking and things like that a little bit more. But at the end of the day, I find a lot more accurate, good, precise Texas Receptors King James material online. Way more than I do in books. I don't even really buy books anymore. I just go online. The answers are usually there, so it's sufficient for me. To buy a book is just like, a lot of these books I've only had since, these are pre-internet day books. And then every now and then there's something that's like, I can't get that information on the internet. Okay, I'll buy the book. And so, a lot of David Cloud books, For Love of the Bible, Evangelicalism Rome, and things like that. But then again, a lot of it now, I mean, that's going back like probably 15, 20 years. A lot of it now is just, it's online there. If you just search for it, you'll find pretty much everything. And so, this whole thing, you either believe the internet or you believe the Bible. The Bible is on the internet. It's just such a dumb thing to say. And obviously, this guy is like, this should be like debating a Mennonite or a Amish, someone who doesn't believe in electricity. It's just silly. It's like, I churn out the butter the old-fashioned way. I don't use machines. That's all. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you use the internet? That's just dumb. It's just a stupid thing to do. It's like not using electricity. And so, but as I've mentioned all throughout this, it's easy to go, okay, well, see how stupid this guy is, and he's a King James guy. So let's just say King James guys are stupid like this. And, if I was coming against Calvinism, as I mentioned before, I wouldn't have a guy, a Westboro Baptist guy, explain Calvinists. The God hates fags guys. I wouldn't have them explain Calvinism to me and they go, see, Calvinists are just psychos. They're crazy. Look what they believe. All Calvinists are like this, I mean, sure, you get a few moderate ones here and there, but this is pretty much where they end up, and it's like, I wouldn't misrepresent people like that. But what I find is people aren't really interested in truth. I just want to say it straight out. I don't think these people are interested one bit in truth. These people have a barrow to push. They have an agenda to push, and they don't really want to hear the facts that get in the way of their good story. So anyway, let's see what Stephen Boyce says about this silly statement that Mitch Knupp has made.
It does research in the life of King James, which, by the way, he did have quite a bit of controversy in, whether homosexuality or not. I don't really care, to be honest. I know that some people might. Well, that's a big deal. Well, yeah, I mean, it is. But at the end of the day, he did not do translation work for the King James Version outside of setting some rules that had to be followed. Like, he was adamant that ecclesia had to be translated church.
So the first thing, the whole thing about King James being homosexual, it's been clearly debunked. There's a guy called Stephen Carlson. He's brought out a book about this. If you just want to go through really good YouTube video on this, just type in Phil Stringer, The Real Story of King James. And a video will come up. It goes for about an hour. You can listen to it on 1.25 or 1.5. And he just goes through and says, look, I used to, even as a King James Texas Receptus guy, I used to think the guy was a pervert because of everyone was saying it. And then I looked into it and I realized, actually, I'm slandering someone here. And so he goes through a lot of these issues, and he basically points out that where this type of thing is coming from is it comes from the school that say David and Jonathan were gay, and Erasmus was gay, George Washington was gay, and Jesus, he was gay too. And there is a whole movement saying those sort of things. And so and what Phil Stringer does, which is very good, and Phil Stringer is from the Dean Burgon Society. When he's in the Dean Burgon Society meetings when he does these videos. And he points out that King James at that time was the only king who actually slept in the same bed as his wife, because usually kings and queens had separate chambers. And it just goes through, he goes through the wording of, like, say, Henry VIII and King James, where Henry VIII had his favourites. But when King James has his favourites, they must be gay people. It must be, he's got his favourite little boys and all this sort of stuff. And even to the point where I've heard, say someone like Jacob Prash from Moriel Ministries, he just comes out and says, King James was a pedophile. And I'm like, what? And so that's another issue. I'll debate anyone, anywhere, anytime on that issue. And that's not even a King James issue. That's just a historical issue. But it is just another thing that people will throw at. And if you get down to it, James White, well, the guy was a homosexual. He'd look at you sideways and say, don't you realize he was a pervert? Many people will say this. So, Stephen Boyce might be like, well, I'm not really interested. I don't really care. Sort of like the millennial, like, I don't, whatever. But it's like, this is important. If you're going to slander someone, and see, the thing is, I don't care who it is, you say truth about them. You don't just say, what's popular. You find out if it's true. And so, and then he mentions, so another thing he mentions is the whole thing about church. I've gone through this several times, but the King James didn't just translate ecclesia as just only church. They used, the congregation was to do with the Jews, assembly was a mixture of people, and church were the followers, the believers of Jesus. And so that's pretty clear. If you just do a word study on that, you'll find those. That's the pattern in the King James Version. And so when King James was saying these things, he wouldn't have just been like sitting in his room, that was my idea. Perhaps it was. He was a brilliant guy too. He actually translated a lot of the Psalms into, I think it was French and Latin. He was a brilliant guy. He knew many languages. And so him coming from Scotland, many times kings of that era were just as learned as many of the scholars who were around them, so that they understood these issues. And so when you look at him talking about these issues of church and bishop and things like that, he's not saying this out of ignorance. He knows his stuff, and he has advisors around him who many times, like say Lancelot Andrews, he was basically the king's preacher. He spoke 21 languages. And so 15 European languages and 6 dead languages. And so these guys were brilliant. And so anyway, the whole thing, he wanted church not to be that. Well, it was put into a specific design in the King James so you could specifically see. It wasn't just all rendered congregation or all rendered assembly or all rendered church. There were specific there's specific semantic range definitions with those words.
It could not be congregation. He was adamant that they maintained the usage of terms like bishop for the episkopos.
Okay, let's have a quick look at that. So I jumped onto Will Kinney's site, brandplucked.webs, and I'm sure this page has probably been up for nearly 20 years. And so half the time, Will Kinney stuff has been up there for so long, it's like people are just without excuse. You can just type in bishops, King James Bible, King James only, Textus Receptus, whatever. I mean, I'm pretty sure this article's on my website and has been since like 2009 or something, 2008, I think. Okay, so let's go through it. Bishop and bishopric. Is the word bishop a bad translation in the King James Bible? Bible correctors come in every stripe and flavor. None of them believes the Bible exists, a Bible composed of 66 books, including the Old and New Testament. So I'm just going to skip over that a little bit because we just want to stick with bishop. Okay, so bishop, as found not only in the King James Bible, but in many others as well. Why do they object to the word bishop? Some think it implies a hierarchy of church authority, and others reference to the fact that we are all priests before God and nobody is above anyone else. Okay, so let's go through. This argument is much in keeping with the spirit of our apostate age, which casts off all authority and screams for their rights to be independent, self-directed, rugged individuals who is not going to, or individual who is not going to let anyone else tell him what to do. It also displays a self-willed ignorance of the whole counsel of God as found in his precious words. Like it or not, there is an office of a bishop, elder, presbyter, and pastor, all of which are basically the same thing. So that's an interesting thing where, say, with Philip Powell of Christian Witness Ministries, he used to team up with Vanguard, which was Sian Bao, and he was a brilliant guy who knew Hebrew very well. And so these guys were looking at midrash interpretation, way back in the 90s. So they actually separated on this issue, on whether a pastor and elder are the same thing, sort of thing. And they do have a role of authority in teaching correct doctrine, guarding against false teachers, feeding the flock, and maintaining church discipline. Look at every reference to elders, bishops, presbyters, and pastor, and you will see that every New Testament church has had a plurality of leadership. The modern day idea practice of a single pastor proceeding over a local church body of believers is nowhere to be found in the scriptures. And so that's an interesting topic in concept. I've sort of only been involved in churches where it's like the pastor and that's it. Sort of, you might have a group of elders who are usually picked by the pastor and can be sacked by the pastor. So it's the pastor anyway. Sometimes there's group of elders are just sort of there to make it look like there's a second opinion, but usually there's not. Some churches have this whole elders thing and they elect a pastor. That's how it usually is in that upside down thing. And it's an interesting thing. And, over the years through listening to James White's material on, textual criticism, just basically pointing out where he's wrong. Over the years, I've listened to his argumentation on this, and some of it's quite interesting, and so I guess I haven't really thought of it that much recently. But anyway, I'll just continue. But all I'll say is I'm prepared to learn, if James White's right, I'll say, yeah, he's right there. But I would have to study that quite in depth. Each local, here we have an ambulance coming past, or probably the police arresting someone, a protester or something. Each local church has a plurality of elders or overseers. The word elder implies that they are generally older and more experienced, mature men. Overseers brings out the aspect of watching over the flock to keep them safe from false teachers and wolves in sheep's clothing. The bishop is the more literal word coming directly from the Greek New Testament, which means to watch over another. The pastors, which, by the way, is found only one time in the entire New Testament, and it's in the plural, not in the singular. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11 and 12, were given by Christ to feed his church and protect God's people. Okay. Let the elders rule. Uh, um, sorry, I'll just try to keep that down a bit so you can see it. Let the elders rule well. Sorry, let the elders that rule well be counted of double honor, especially those who labor in the word and doctrine. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 17. Remembering them which rule over you, who have spoken unto you the word of God, whose faith follow, considering the end of their conversation. Hebrews 13:7. Obey them which have rule over you, and submit yourself, for they watch for your souls, as they that must give account, that they may do it with joy, not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you. Hebrews 13:17. And we beseech you, brethren, to know them which labor among you and are over you in the Lord, etc., etc. So we know those scriptures. They're there. You can read them. So let's just have a look at bishops. Notice that the elders and overseers are the same office and position or local church. So he must have said that. Well, anyway, there was always a plurality of elders and bishops, not a single individual. Um, in Acts chapter 20, we read, and from Miletus, he, Paul, sent to Ephesus and called for the elders of the church. And when they were come to him, he said, take heed, therefore, unto yourselves and to the flock of God, over which the Holy Ghost hath made you overseers as episcopos, and episcopos is bishops, to feed the church of God, which he hath purchased with his own blood. Paul and Timotheus, the servants of Jesus Christ, to the saints in Christ Jesus, which are at Philippi, with the bishops and deacons, grace be with you, etc. Notice, again, a bishop and an elder have the same office. The Apostle Paul writes to his fellow helper Titus and instructs him in the following way. For this cause I leave thee in Crete, that thou shouldest set in order the things that are wanting, and ordain elders in every city, as I appointed you. For a bishop must be blameless, etc. The Greek word for which we directly get our English word bishop is episkopos, and is found only 5 times in the entire New Testament. 4 times the King James Bible translates it as bishop, 3 of which refer to men, and 1 time as overseers. 1 time the word bishop refers to Christ himself as the shepherd and bishop of your souls in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 25. The office of a bishop. And so we also have the almost exact same Greek word episcope, and it is translated the office of a bishop and bishopric in Acts chapter 1, verse 20. The word bishopric is not at all archaic. Well, some people would beg to differ, but, Will Kinney, that's his point of view. By the way, the office of a bishop is called an office in the Bible. If a man desire the office of a bishop, he requires a good work. There is also the office of a deacon. See those verses. I recently had one guy complaining about the word bishop in the King James Bible. He also told me that in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, where it talks about the office of a bishop, there's a wrong translation, and in the KJV, there was no Greek for office of. And so, anyway, so he's going through a few of these issues. I just want to sort of get to the main point here. Okay, so he's going through Little and Scott and Thayers and all the ones that it's quite amazing. Here's Mitch Canupi saying, why would you why would you go through Thayers? Why would you go through Kittle? The Nazi war criminal and these Unitarians, and it's like. Then you turn around and someone like Will Kinney, who would be considered staunch KJV only, he's clearly using these dictionaries, to show that, okay, they are in agreement with the King James here, because 95% of the time they're going to say correct things. It's just that 5% that it's like, hang on, that's got a Unitarian leaning. Okay, well, they're obviously trying to make out that Jesus is created there. Okay, they've got some sort of weird influence. And so anyway, Little and Scott define the office of episcopos, the office of an overseer or bishop. Thayer, he has the office of a bishop. That big long one has the office of a bishop. Kittles, he has office as well as visitation, the Christian office of a bishop. Not only just the King James translated as that office of a bishop, we have all these other ones here too. So we're looking at Coverdale, Great Bible, Geneva, etc. Have office of a bishop. Some other English ones. Wycliffe Bishopric. New King James 1982 has bishop. Okay, so just seeing if there's any more. So anyway, I would just encourage you to go to Wilkins' site. He's got a whole bunch of articles here. Like the other day, I just showed you how you can go Control F, and I've got the word bishop written there. So you go straight to that article. You can read that. Now, we were looking up Rick Norris. So if I just type in Norris, there we go to that article there. So it's quite helpful because there isn't really much of a catalog listing here. But usually you can get there. And try Google search as well. Put brandplug.webs.com, put in brackets on the end of that, like so, and then just type in bishops, and there we go. Comes up in a Google search. So that's how you that's how you do finer Google searches. And so he also mentions, the word bishop here, but it's a Catholic bishop. So anyway, so let's go back to what Stephen Boyce is saying here.
Therefore, it could not be overseer to maintain the Church of England structure of doing things. Pretty much coming bishop from the Latin side of things, but he did set boundaries. But at the end of the day, his name is only there because he was the one that permitted this to happen. On the other hand, what he just said really makes no sense to me. Well, we've got too many people that are internet believers, not Bible believers. Well, if you're applying that to King James, there's nothing about King James in the Bible. James is in the Bible, King is in the Bible, but King James is not in the Bible. So how is that even in the same ballpark? How else are you going to research King James outside of books or internet researches that actually go into the data or into his life or memoirs? So what was your response in your mind when you're sitting there in a debate and he makes comments like that? Did you take it the way I just took it?
Yeah, the biggest way I took it, which was the same thing that came to my mind right now, is he basically brings up himself, because I never said that King James was homosexual. I was just going to leave that alone because I don't know that for sure. So why am I going to bring that up? I think there's a lot of evidence.
So he doesn't know it for sure, okay? And Stephen Boyce was sort of like, look, we don't really know that. Okay, so let's look at how this progresses.
Evidence for that, and even in one of his podcasts, he makes the statement. Think about this. Mitch calls a lot of other people homosexuals, including Bible translators and other men. He accuses them of being a homosexual, attacking their character.
Well, there were two translators on the NIV who were homosexual. Joseph Chambers, he lives in North Carolina, not far from these guys. They can go to him, visit him at his Paul Creek Ministries. I've visited him there, had dinner with him, met his wife, know his son, been to his son's house as well. And Joe Chambers, he interviewed Virginia Mollencott. Now, Virginia Mollencott is, I'm pretty sure she's still alive, but she has a lesbian partner, and she is very outspoken for the LBGT community. And she was a consultant, a bit like James White was a consultant on the New American Standard Bible. She was a consultant, and she was working on some of the English words and terminology in the NIV. There was also another guy, I can't remember his name at the moment, at the present, but he was a homosexual as well. And so these things have been brought up, like these guys are homosexuals, so then it's just that's been the argument basically in the 80s and 90s and the noughties, and it's like, well, King James are homosexual, so what's wrong with having homosexuals on our translation committee? And it's like, so you have to go through all the whole rigmarole. So say this has become popularized. This book here, Power and Glory, um, Adam Nicholson. It's a really good read. It's very well written, but there's a lot of misinformation here, and he basically just says that King James had his favorites and just says that they're gay, and so it's just like a saucy sort of BBC documentary on someone and on the royal family, scandal sort of thing, and so you got to understand that there's money to be made in scandals, and so some of these people were probably, especially the translators, they were just boring people according to the world's eyes, boring people who just read books, and just knew a lot. But they just make these saucy stories about, people were drunkards. And, one guy he left the translation committee room and just went down the pub and got drunk, and all this stuff. And it's like, you study into these things and it's like, well, actually, no, that is not factual. It's a bit like, Nostradamus. Nostradamus is written in Latin, and so sometimes you have words that can mean different things. In a sense where the one of the rivers near where Nostradamus lived was, I think it was called the Neapold River, which meant something completely different. But they were like, oh, it's Napoleon. See, he was predicting Napoleon in his writings. It's like, no, he's talking about a local river, and you got to, and but that sold a lot of books. People were just like redefining that. They had no idea what the Latin said, but it's like, that looks like he's talking about Hitler there, and so they would sell books that way. And so, unfortunately, that type of thing has crept into the history of the King James Bible. There's several books that I've got in about King James that go in depth, and like the Cradle King, really, really good book. But the problem is, you'll just be reading through, and then it's like this saucy royal family scandal of King James with his favorites. Um, and it's, yeah, as I said, just if you want some um, beginning material on that, just type in Phil Stringer, The Real Story of King James, and you'll get some really good information there.
In his podcast, but then he says, now it is true that King James was just very affectionate. And he's talking about with his friends and with other men.
What's wrong with that? If you go to Papua New Guinea, you'll sit there with men who are massive and play rugby. Like, they'll just pick you up and slam you like a WWE. They're huge. They'll sit next to you talking about the things of God and put their hand on your knee and on your shoulder while they're talking. And they're fine with that, because homosexuality is sort of not an issue in Papua New Guinea. Where it's an issue, people are like, I don't want people to think I'm like that. It's like this whole phobia thing. But real men can relax and be like that. They walk around with their arms around each other, holding hands down the street, swinging. And it's like they're just good friends. You see big, massive guys walking around holding hands. And as they're chatting, they're holding each other's hand. And they'll do sort of like a bit of a handshake and a pull of the finger and like, see you later. It's like, and you get that in certain cultures and certain communities. And that's what Phil Stringer brings out in his video. So I'm just remembering a lot of that. Where in England at the time, around King James era, foreigners were writing about the English people, complaining that they were too affectionate. So they would always greet each other with a kiss, like kisses on the cheek and a hug and all this sort of stuff, which we English people don't do that anymore. Americans don't greet each other like that. But we think of Italians, hey, and they come up and they're hugging you, and yes, people from Spain, and they're kissing on the cheek and all this sort of stuff. People from Mediterranean regions do that, where we're more like, very staunch and very, very wooden. And so just, you can't read the culture that you're in now and read that into this material. And so, he's like, oh well, he was just more affectionate towards men. That does not mean someone's a homosexual. Just ridiculous.
So he just kind of dismisses it, but Mitch has to acknowledge that. But I wasn't even going to bring that up. But listen to his argument for why King James is not a homosexual, because a state was named after him.
Well, yeah, and how many evil people had states and cities named after? How many evil kings had states? So that doesn't.
Well, I think specifically they're talking about people going over on the Mayflower, which is like Stephen's like the Puritans. They would have had they would have wanted to follow the Geneva Bible to the letter, and so well they actually had the King James with them, so it's wrong. But then it's like they named Jamestown. Yeah, and doesn't that prove that they don't hate the guy? They're naming his whole city. You got to understand the context of who named Jamestown. You know what I mean? That's what this preacher's saying, expecting people to know that history. That Nathan and Stephen have no idea about it. They're like, what? Stalingrad and other cities are named after psychos, and so even Charlestown and things like that. Like it's true. Why would Puritan people, why would pilgrims be naming cities after people who were known perverts of that day? You know what I'm saying? And so there is, like, I'm not saying this is a good argument for, King James not being homosexual, but what I'm saying is these guys are sort of ignorant of pretty much everything what Mitch Knupp is saying. I would never use this argumentation, but I would just say that he does have a point that these people, the pilgrims, were saying that they named Jamestown. North and South Carolina were named after Charles. It's who named these? Look up these people. Who were they? The pilgrims. Puritans, people, the children of these people, and it's like, did they consider King James to be homosexual? Was it well known? Was this a well known fact of that era? It just wasn't. And it's just been made up after King James is dead.
There is gifting to power. If you are powerful, you have the right to be overlooked in quite a bit. Especially a king. Who's going to tell you to step down? Right. I mean, it's not like the U.S. We get to vote on a president and impeach him. And when the early colonies were here, they still had obligation back to England in many ways, because England, in some ways, funded some of the travels that came to the West, and naturally they're going to dedicate things for them. I mean, that they even had New England. They were trying to model itself after England itself. People left because they didn't like certain things about England, but they didn't.
Okay, I'm just going to do a bait. Like, I know nothing about this. Okay, so for a few things here and there, let's look up Jamestown. Okay, just go to Wikipedia. It was the first permanent settlement of English settlement to the Americas. It was located James Fort, considered a permanent after a brief abandonment. Okay. Arrival and beginning. Okay, so it looks like these guys have gone there for England. Okay, so they named it in honor of King James. So this was a London company sponsoring this. And so that would explain a little bit more. And so, yeah, I would just say, okay, the whole issue, well, actually, maybe I can see where it's named, why it's named that. Okay, I guess arrival and beginning. Anyway, it looks like it is just a city that was named after the king, pretty much because they were trying to get in favour of the king, which would go with what Stephen Boyce is talking about. So there you go.
Hate everything about England. But again, it's nice when you have power. If you have power, you can have things overlooked. If you have power, you can have things named after you. It doesn't matter. There are numerous things that you can go to, street names, cities, towns that are named after people who are evil. They may not have been homosexuals, but they were evil murderers, adulterous people. I mean, that's not an argument. I don't even
No.
know why that's relevant. Again, he had no decision making when it came to the overall translation of itself. He wasn't on a committee doing translation work. He was simply giving instructions and guidelines and authorizing it under his reign, allowing it to take place under his provision and financial support, which I don't have a problem with. No more than I have a problem with the other day in the podcast when we were talking about, well, these people are, in these lexicons, they deny the blood atonement. I don't care. Like, I mean, I'm not reading them for theology. If King James was doing more of the translation work, maybe I'd have a little bit more.
Well, the thing is, it's good to understand where people are coming from. If you read a a dictionary, it's written by Jehovah's Witness. So this is the thing. If I said, "Oh, here's a dictionary. It's written by the Watchtower guys," you go, "It's going to be biased." And so these guys just, you know, obviously people are saying that about King James, homosexuality, etc. Um, but for Mitch to say, you know, to point out that a lot of the dictionaries and a lot of things are written by Unitarians or people who denied the deity of Christ or hated the Trinity, like say the Encyclopedia Britannica, when you look up the article on what the Trinity is, it basically says a Trinity is a man-made concept that is not found in the Bible. Straight out, it says it. Well, how come it says that? Well, it's because it's got Unitarian influence, and so that's got to be taken into consideration. And I take that into consideration whenever I'm looking at something. Like say, this book by Adam Nicholson. You just go, okay, this guy, I think he's worked for the BBC. He's written a bunch of articles and things, and when you listen to his stuff online, you can go and see him online. He's straight away into the whole homosexual thing about King James. You know, sometimes you read through books and you don't know the author, and sometimes it's like you feel a breath of fresh air not knowing who the author is, because other times you just feel this guy's going to have his bias. um Alistair McGrath. But anyway, I think it's important that we know where things come from, and to understand, um you know especially when it comes to we're going, okay, well, this dictionary says this, so that settles it for me. It's like, well, yeah, to me, I go the layers underneath that, and I go, okay, well, this, yeah, it goes there, but who was he influenced by? Because there are so many mistakes in dictionaries. Often people that they're not doing in-depth studies enough to see to go through something and go, hang on, that's a mistake in that dictionary. The things that should be the bedrock, it's like, well, hang on, there's three or four other layers below that, and the person's personality and personal belief system can mar their definitions and can mar what people are talking about.
More of an issue with it, but if he did a good job, I still wouldn't have an issue with it. So why is that even relevant? He wasn't even a major part in doing translation work. Yeah, he had a big part in making it happen and allowing it to happen, but at the end of the day, does it really matter? And I know my dad, for example, who is not anywhere in the ballpark with these guys.
Notice that, like last time or last night, the video I was going through, Stephen was like, I sat through so many sermons like this, and with these King James guys and all the rest of it. But then he's like, oh, my dad is nothing like this guy. We're more TR, preferred, and or King James preferred and TR only sort of thing. And And it's sort of like, well, wasn't he sort of saying, no, I was pretty much this ignorant King James sort of guy, just like this guy. And then now he's like totally, you're separating him, his family, which would obviously be himself as well in that. Like, no, we're separate from that. And like I said in the previous video I did, Timothy Berg, Stephen Boyce, and many others who have grown up King James only and get labelled that, they tend to just go, yeah, I was just this dimwit who didn't know anything. I was just this, stupid fool. And then I started reading, James White. I started reading these other guys, and now I'm, I can read the Bible properly. I can exegete things, and I can pass a Greek word. And it's like, what about just looking at someone like D.A. Waite, who's, basically he majored in Greek, and like, back in 1948 when it was hard to do, not just you learn the alphabet and learn how to sound out a word in this fake Erasmian uh, pronunciation. And so anyway, I'll just continue on.
They're more TR based, and then they're King James preferred. They just believe the King James is better. Not even in the same camp with these guys. My dad doesn't even like calling it King James. He calls it the Authorized Version. I just think this is petty and not important personally.
Yeah, I would agree. And it also reveals he has very weak arguments against this point, which is why he brings up states being named after him and his sons. What does his son have to do with
nothing?
Yeah.
And why is he bringing this up in the debate? You didn't even raise this point. If you raise this point, that's why I said.
I mean, the thing is, like Stephen Boyce, when he debated against me, he brought up a whole bunch of issues that were just non-issues. And it's like, 1 + 1 = 2, Nick. I'm like, yeah, and what's that got to do with what we're talking about? And he's like, okay, let's move on. And he would, it's like just winning debate points where they're just not even relative issues. And so that's, this guy's obviously a preacher, and he's going through his stuff and just has this mantra of things that he brings up all the time. And this issue usually does get brought up. It usually is something that's a hot topic. And I find these guys just don't seem to know much about it. Now, I would encourage them to become educated in that, to read Stephen Carlson's book, to look at what Phil Stringer said about it on YouTube, and then, go from there.
A couple of weeks ago, I was like, is this his first debate? Because he didn't do an intro at all based on structure or to deal with an issue of study or interest that was relevant. He went into Baptist history, and then he switched over to another gear, which was more preaching than it was actually giving information in contrast to yours. At this point on these questions, he should be engaging your position. And unless you have like data out there on the internet circulating where you make claims about King James being a sodomite, okay, well then this is bad debating technique. And again, I'm not I'm not the best debater in the world, but I've done quite a few debates. And if it's not relevant to your opponent's statements, don't even mention it. You only have so much time. And as we've seen in his debating performance so far.
Yes, Stephen. Just go through the playlist that I mentioned in earlier videos. The playlist that's in my YouTube channel, where I have about 6 videos going through Stephen Boyce's comments, and you'll see that he just brought up a whole bunch of issues that were redundant. That I just, later on, I'm just like, okay, I'll just have to prove these wrong, because I said these things to Stephen at the time after the debate, and he's just like, well, debate's over, dude. And it's like, well, aren't you interested in truth? Aren't you interested whether you're right or wrong? It's like, whatever, I'm not interested. It's like, okay, well, because you're sort of going around saying that, I've sort of lost the debate, I had to make these videos just to prove that, he's going to this Ethiopic guy in the Smithsonian and all. And why did he go to all that trouble just to say something false? Why did he go to all the trouble to talk about this 5960 list of Scrivener, where I'm not even talking about that list? And he just had all these things that were just not relative to the debate at all. They were very misleading. And so, yeah, grab a mirror, Stephen.
Or he's had to be cut off right in the middle of the sentence because he runs out of time. But how much time is being wasted just on this point alone? I mean, we're only a couple seconds in, and to me, it's like, this is unnecessary. You didn't raise this point. But go ahead.
I agree, but I appreciate him going there.
Yeah.
It helped me out a little bit.
I don't even have the internet. I don't even have a smartphone.
What a shame.
I don't even have access to the internet unless I go to the library.
It's just so dumb. Why wouldn't you have access to the internet? Why wouldn't you have a smartphone? It's like, and I understand a lot of these fundamentalist churches, they're like, you can't have the internet because of porn. And that is a huge problem. A lot of people who are involved in apologetics ministries and have come out with major problems. We look at, Ravi Zachariah. We look at, there's several people who have come out with issues. But the thing is, usually these people, like say Jimmy Swaggart, for example, he was sort of like a borderline apologist, but mostly just a preacher. And Jimmy Swaggart, he got his pornography through magazines, not through digital media. And so it's more accessible through digital media. And a lot of churches will have a church structure where you have to have internet blockers and things like that. I've found them just so restrictive. Like I'd be doing a study on, is King James a homosexual? And I type that in, it's like blocked. It's like, man, I can't do any study with these things, So, and you'd have to, allow a page and all the rest of it. And at the end of the day, who's policing it? Yeah, you're going to send that to a pastor, or, it works maybe if you've got a problem and you have to have your wife looking over your shoulder and stuff like that. And look, I don't want to look down on people who have massive issues with that, because I've known people who've had issues and they've talked about it, and it's like, man, that's next level struggle and just craziness in people's minds. And so I don't want to downplay them, struggling with something like that. I really feel sorry for people who have to get their wife and pastor and family involved in such an embarrassing thing. But that would probably be why the fundamentalist guy is like, I don't even have the internet, like as a prideful statement, you know what I mean? Because to most of us, it's like, I don't even have electricity. It's like, what? It's so bizarre. Anyway.
I don't want the internet, but yet I got two websites, or I'm a part of one website. Website 1611 Defense is not I'm a guest there, Brother Kyle Kiker. That's his website. And I'm on there because I was asked to.
So
let me show you kind of lies that spread about people. King James.
So that would bring more of a context to say that's why he's saying that. I don't have the internet. So in other words, he's basically saying, I'm not into pornography. That's what he's really saying there.
Wrote a treatise called Basilican Door, and he's talking about what James has written that encouraged his sons to, when they marry a woman, to treat her like a woman and treat her godly. Don't step out on, don't commit adultery, and by God's sake, don't ever commit that crime of buggery.
What is he responding to right there? Remind me of what you said.
He's saying, I didn't say anything. I brought up something. I think I said that King James was a Calvinist, something like that, because of something he said. Yeah, I think I mentioned something about King James, but I never attacked him. But what he's saying right here is basically that King James wrote a letter to his sons telling them not to be involved with homosexuality. So that proves he's not a homosexual. Well, if I remember correctly, David and Solomon both wrote letters to their children saying not to be involved in sexual immorality. And
but there's proof that they, Solomon had the 700 or 300 wives and 700 concubines, and David had 12 wives, and we can see that type of thing. It's clearly written in Scripture. We don't have that about King James. It's speculation. It's the way that people are interpreting English culture back then. That, just because people dress fancy, King James dressed just as fancy as Henry VIII, but we don't say, "Oh, Henry VIII was gay." It's just this perception. He's skinnier. We just picture people like that as being more effeminate. People who kiss other guys on the cheek. It's like Italian culture. I mean, I grew up in Melbourne, a huge Italian culture, huge Greek culture. I mean, I would see people and they'd come up and give you a kiss on the cheek and say, "Hey, mate, oh, beautiful to see you." And they'd hold your hand and they'd give you a hug. And even, here we have a lot of Maori influence from New Zealand. Really big guys, sometimes they've got tattoos on half of their face and they look like they're part of the mongrel mob bikie gang and everything. And you go up to them, and when you know how soft and how nice these guys are, you go up to them and say, "Hey, bro, you from New Zealand?" And then they're like, "Yeah, bro." They're just the nicest guys. You say, "Hey, are you from New Zealand?" "Yeah, bro." Then they'll give you a hug. They're just like, that's just culture. There's different cultures all around the world. And England at the time had a culture that was huggy, that was, full of feeling. And the king was writing books against homosexuality. I understand the point he's trying to make here, but you've got to have proof that he did this sort of stuff to then say he was a hypocrite and he didn't take the advice, or the children didn't take the advice, or whatever.
Both were heavily involved in disobeying God's laws sexually.
Yeah,
So
it's just
again,
it's
a
almost
very
like he's
weak point.
responding to you, but it's almost like he's responding to something you never said. So this is interesting to me. Carry
It's
on.
almost
It's almost like what Stephen Boyce did in our debate. He just brought up a whole bunch of stuff that was just sort of like, why are you going there?
exactly like that.
Something got blurred out here.
The TR issue. It's like we're debating on this verse. It's like, well, let's talk about the Textus Receptus and the history of this and that. And it's like, well, why are you giving a lesson? Well, aren't we having a debate? You know what I mean? It's like, and Stephen sort of defaults like that in a lot of these videos where he'll just start talking about this canonical thing, which is like, his little pet project on his Explain International. And a lot of it's good stuff. It's interesting stuff and all the rest of it. He'll just default to that. And it sort of looks like he's answered the question, but he actually hasn't.
But yet James was accused. You know why he was accused? Because when King James came from Scotland, he came to England, there was 5 men set on Elizabeth's court that he dismissed because of their disloyalty. They said, "We'll get even." So the main perpetrator was Anthony Weldon. He told his son, he said, "I've written some things concerning James. I don't want this to be published till I'm dead." You listening? King James died in 1625. His son Charles was executed in 1649. Anthony Weldon died in 1649. In 1650, his son published the work that said that James was a pervert and a sodomite. That is a dead man's legacy.
Actually, you're
That's
playing
been
with
tainted.
conspiracy because
These
he's
modern
accusing of
versions,
conspiracy.
Westcott-
It's so annoying to me when people are like, conspiracy, Well, King James, didn't he have, what about Guy Fawkes and the gunpowder plot? That was a conspiracy, a real, true conspiracy. Group of people, Catholics, got together, tried to blow up Parliament. I mean, back then, that would have been like, thwarting a 9/11. Can you imagine if that worked? If they blew up the Parliament with all the king in it and all the, all the representatives of Parliament, that would have had a lot of these translators in it. And England would have been absolutely ruined and destroyed. And so there's conspiracies, the conspiracy theory, they like to King James conspiracy, aliens and Area 51 and, and Alex Jones over here and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, what about the reality of real conspiracy? It's just a silly thing that I just find young people who have been browbeaten to not think. and to not think outside of the mainstream narrative. And it's like, oh, that's conspiracy theory, and it's just this tag that they just put on King James only, TR people, conspiracy, conspiracy, just to try and discredit us. But I mean, there's plenty of conspiracy theories that are just real, that are reality. I mean, there's drug cartels around the world. There are governments that are run by weapons sales. There are banking systems in the world that are private that control inflation and the price of gold. And there are people behind all this stuff, and a lot of it isn't honest and open and democratic. It's closed doors. It's there's a lot of invasions of countries by clandestine groups, the CIA, FBI. I mean, here in Australia, we had all of us had our phones tapped by the FBI in Australia. Front page headlines for weeks, and it just fades away because we have a spy base here with 1,000 CIA agents called Pine Gap. Look it up. Pine Gap. CIA agents, Australia. And you can read about it. They make documentaries. They've actually had mini series about this place, like with love scenes and all the rest of it. I can't be bothered even looking at it because I know it would just be propaganda. But it's like that's conspiracy stuff. But they're spying on us. We know that. America basically dominate the world and have countries at their mercy. And we just basically stuck our middle finger up at France. We had organized to spend, I think was it 17 billion? Anyway, it was a huge amount of money on nuclear submarines. And we just scrapped it right at the last minute, and we're going with the United States. And so United States are really good at doing this. And so we formed an alliance with the United States and with Britain, and we've just told France to shove it. France has basically kicked, they kicked the Australian ambassador out, or they were going to, something like that. But there are conspiracies in the world. There are people who aren't interested in peace. They're just interested in manufacturing weapons, and they're interested in stirring up problems. Mining companies who are doing the wrong thing all around the world, and they're killing local people. They're displacing people. This is just known. And so the whole thing, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. It's like for someone to turn around and say King James is homosexual. I like say the story that Mitch is making here. I'm not 100% sure about it because I haven't gone through those details. But for Stephen, he doesn't know anything about it either, and so we're both on that same page. Where I'm like, well, it could be true, or maybe it's not, but not just it's a conspiracy theory, and that's the answer. No, you should really look up what this guy's saying, whether it's true or not, and then if it's true, go, yeah, well, that's interesting. If it's not, we'll go, well, okay, Mitch is wrong, and then say he's wrong, not just say it's a conspiracy, therefore he's wrong. It doesn't default to someone being wrong just because you've tagged something as a conspiracy.
Hort.
Yep.
Oh, he does mention Westcott and Hort. I want to hear this in a second, but this is interesting that he's playing into conspiracies. So he just admitted that there's documentation within the lifetime of personal contacts, encounters with King James, but it's automatically dismissed because apparently there was some sort of conspiratorial, trying to get even, mad because people got dismissed, none of which can be provable. Again, I don't think.
Notice that none of which can be provable. I mean, we have a lot of documentation about that era. Especially someone high up as King James. There's a lot of things written about him. And so why would Stephen Boyce just say that you can't prove this?
Either one can be provable. I don't think that
either one, it's like, no, if you study these things, usually you can study something to the point where you're reasonably satisfied with a logical answer, not just like, well, you could go either way. I don't know any of what happened, so you can go either way. So it's like just seeing two people there accused of murdering someone, and you're like, well, it could be either one of them. Even if we look at all the evidence, we'll probably just go, well, either one of them did it. It's like, no, you look at the evidence and then you make up your mind. And so this is just the preconceived understanding of, okay, the King James guys are always wrong, and so we're just going to go with that. They're always wrong, sort of thing.
That we can sit here, you and I can say King James was definitely a homosexual. I've heard claims that he was, so we have to put it on the table. Can we be dogmatic that he was? No. Can we be dogmatic that he wasn't? No.
Why? If you look at the information, you should be able to be dogmatic whether he was or wasn't. And the thing is, think of the term. Homosexual means you're only with men. Only. Bisexual means that you're with men and women. And so he had 8 kids. I mean, so that tag doesn't fit. To say he was either bisexual or a pedophile, then you have to prove those things. And so you can't just go, oh, you can't prove it and you can't disprove it. You look at the evidence and you look at the facts.
So again, null and void, not relevant. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when we're talking about the King James, their work, its consistency, their accuracy, their usage of the Greek, their usage of the text, the usage of the ancient translations. None of that matters. So to me, this is null and void because nobody can be dogmatic. He's defending a man that you didn't accuse, which is kind of like, why are you playing this like he's already guilty? But then you're going to accuse people of reporting things in history within the lifetime of King James just to get even, and you have no proof of that.
Well, it was pretty clear that this information came out after the death of Charles, and so his son, after he was beheaded. So, yeah.
No statements of that. That's conspiracy. Again,
Yep.
Conspiracies. A lot of conspiracies in this debate.
Conspiracy.
Yes, there are.
What you're doing with these modern versions, you're advocating those men. Those men hated America. Those men, their own son said those men were pro-Roman Catholic. Those men were evolutionists. Those men were drunkards.
What?
Those men did not believe the Bible.
They were Anglicans. They were not Roman Catholics. I'm sure they had friends in the Roman Catholic Church as much as they did in some of the other.
They were friends with Unitarians. They were friends with Roman Catholics. They had leanings towards Roman Catholic concepts, and they felt that the evangelical world was something that they couldn't gravitate to, and so that's pretty clear in their writings.
Other denominational movements, they were very influential in their writings. They were not evolutionists.
Okay, so I just quickly looked up. So this is deanbergonsociety.org, Preservation Westcott HTM. So other teachings of Westcott and Hort. So this is by Phil Stringer. So Phil Stringer's very good on these issues because Phil Stringer's been part of the Dean Bergon Society. He was also part of the William Carey Bible Society and also the Majority Text Preservation Group or something like that. Anyway, there are many other areas that cause fundamental Bible believers to have serious questions about Westcott and Hort. Westcott denied that Genesis 1 through 3 were historically true. Hort praised Darwin and his theory of evolution. Both Westcott and Hort praised the Christian socialist movement of their day. Westcott belonged to several organizations designed to promote Christian socialism and served as president of one of them, the Christian Social Union. Both Westcott and Hort showed sympathy for the movement to return the Church of England to Rome. Both honored rationalist philosophers of their time like Samuel Taylor, Coleridge, Dr. Frederick Maurice, Dr. Thomas Arnold. Both were serious students of the Greek philosophers Plato and Aristotle. There is much about the teaching of Westcott and Hort to deeply trouble any objective Bible believer. Okay, I think they mention a little bit more about evolution. Um, so it's a bit of a summary here. While Westcott and Hort praised evolutionists, socialists, and modernists, they were bitterly critical of evangelical soul winners. Westcott criticized the work of William Booth and the Salvation Army. Hort criticized the Crusades of D.L. Moody and criticized the soul-winning Methodists. While Westcott and Hort praised evolutionists, socialists, and modernists, they were bitterly, it's actually just absolutely repeated there, like word for word. So, so that's in Phil Stringer's book. So Phil Stringer, obviously that's not source material, but I have seen the quotes. So maybe I should type that in. Okay, so Westcott and Hort. Quotes. Let's look at that. And so, yeah, I understand Gail Rippling, yes, she got things wrong. You know, so does James White about Westcott and Hort. But a lot of this stuff um, is very true, and so we can see, especially when it's backed up. Concerning the deity of Christ, he never speaks of himself directly as God, but the aim of his revelation was to lead men to see God in him. John does not expressly affirm the identification of the Word with Jesus Christ. Concerning the Scriptures, I reject the infallibility of the Holy Scriptures overwhelmingly. Our Bible, as well as our faith, is mere compromise. And so if I was reading through this, I would have to double check these. So I would grab part of their quote, copy and paste it into Google in brackets, and then I would see, try to find the books of where these came from. But I have seen a lot of these quotes in the writings of people like Phil Stringer and others who are, they write books against Gail Repplinger, for example, and point out her faults. And so, so hell is not a place of punishment of the guilty. It is a common abode of departed spirits. Actually, I'm looking for the one on evolution here. Yeah, here. Now, no one, I suppose, holds to the first three chapters of Genesis, for example, give that they give a literal history. I could never understand how anyone reading them with open eyes could think that they did. But the book which has most engaged me is Darwin. Whatever may be thought of it, it is a book that one is proud to be contemporary with. My feeling is strong that it is unanswerable. So I know that those two quotations are correct and are from Westcott and Hort. So I've studied those ones out. So let's just look at the racism of Hort. And so here we have a website. Is this a website written by a guy who's a King James only fanatic, kooky, weird? No, this is written by James Snap Jr. So he writes, Fenton John Anthony Hort, 1828 to 1892, was, as you may already know, one of the two British scholars responsible for the 1881 compilation of the Greek text of the New Testament that replaced the King James Version's base, the Textus Receptus. Although the compilation of Westcott and Hort was used in general as the basis for the Revised Version and for the 1901 American Standard Version, many objections were raised against the Westcott and Hort revision. For a recollection of these objections, you can consult the works of John Burgon, such as Revision Revised, Traditional Text of the Holy Gospels, and Causes of Corruption, in which, among many other things, Burgon described the orthodox corruption of Scripture, preceding Bart Ehrman's similarly titled book by over a century, and it's actually a concept of Greaseback. Mathematician and textual researcher George Salmon also compiled a gentle protest against some of the aspects of Westcott and Hort the Westcott and Hort compilation and the theories on which it was grounded. And so I'm going to skip through here. Now it says, however, one can read through these works without noticing objections against something which nowadays would make it highly unlikely that Hort's work would receive acclaim: his racism. Now, I'm, I'm not an advocate for like everything is racist thing. Just because you're white, you're racist. It's amazing. You can get people from Mexico, they look white, but they get branded as, hey, you're a white person with all this privilege, and they're like, hang on, I actually came over the border from Mexico, and they're like, oh, okay, you're one of those. Don't worry, we'll find someone else who looks white and blame them, sort of thing. Um, I'm not a fan of the BLM. I'm not a fan, I'm not woke. So anyway, let's read through this. Perhaps you thought that I was going to say his interest in the occult. Some writers, particularly some King James version, only have accused Hort of being an occultist. Westcott and Hort were both members of a society or club called the Ghostly Guild, which, as anyone can see by reading pages 117 to 120 of the first volume of the Life and Letters of F.J.A. Hort, was formed to collect accounts of paranormal or spirit world phenomena, not to endorse the premises of spiritualism. Hort did indeed attend a seance. He mentioned it in a letter to his wife, written on October 23rd, 1864. We worked till near dinner. He wrote, when we had a very nice little party, the two De Morgans, butler for Bradby and his mother, and Watson, Mrs. Bradby, whom I have never seen, and who was well worth seeing, came in the evening. We tried to turn tables, but the creatures wouldn't stir. The reference to table turning in the final sentence alludes to something done at seances. The two De Morgans mentioned by Hort were from the mathematician Morgan and his wife Sophia. They wrote from matter to spirit. So this includes, in the opening chapter, instructions about how to conduct a table tipping session at which the table will appear to throb and vibrate under the hands as if charged with a kind of electricity. Following the table perhaps will move in a circuitous direction, followed by communications in which the table tips as the medium recites the alphabet. The second chapter is also about rapping and table moving. So they were involved in seances, and that's pretty clear. Even Hoskia, people like to say Hoskia is King James defender or TR defender. Now, Hoskia, Burgon, Miller, Scribner, many times these guys would say Westcott and Hort think this, it's stupid, you probably should go in this direction. And they had enough bullets to defeat Westcott and Hort, but at the end of the day, they weren't like staunch TR defenders or KJV defenders. Hoskia actually went and saw a spirit medium to find out the provenance of a Greek manuscript. And so it's like these guys were into the occult. It's just bizarre. So anyway, we're specifically looking at this racism issue. So how about Hort's racism? In the preface to the Life and Letters of F.J.A. Hort, published in 1896, author Hort states about his father, in all that he wrote, his real self is shown, and nowhere more than in his letters. So it is with some consternation that one finds the following statements in a written letter by Hort on September 25th, 1862, discussing the American Civil War. Note, I have redacted an offensive term in this excerpt, and I won't say it either, or else I'll probably get blocked. I do not for a moment forget what slavery is, or the frightful effects which Olmsted has shown it to be producing on the white society of the South. but I hate it much more for its influence on the whites than on the N-word themselves. And we got to understand that was just a common word back then. You can't put today's standard back there. And, you can listen to government radio and they'll be in Australia and they have all these rap songs with that word, every second word. It's just bizarre. Anyway, the refusal of education to them is abominable. How far are they capable of being ennobled by it is not so clear. As yet everywhere, not in slavery only, they have surely shown themselves only as an immeasurably inferior race. So this is Darwinism. This is eugenics. This is the concept of, they're inferior and we need to, as superiors, we need to educate them. And eventually the eugenics movement was involved in eradicating them in America and giving them syphilis, and also Adolf Hitler with the Jews. And so he had the same concept as the Americans, but he just put the Jews right down the bottom. If enjoyment, hang on, as yet everywhere, just human and no more. Their religion trophy and sensuous, their highest virtues those of a good Newfoundland dog. If enjoyment and comparative freedom from sorrow and care make up happiness, probably no set of men in Europe, unless it be the Irish, are so happy. Their real and most unquestionable degradation, if altered by slavery, is hardly aggravated. The sin of slavery to them is rather negative and hindering advance. Yet what advance has there really been in the West, Indies, or Northern states? Nevertheless, the thing is accursed most positively from its corrupting power over the dominant race. And when I'm reading this is how I read modern versions. I'm just like, what are you trying to say here? But while agreeing with the advocates of the North that slavery is at the bottom of the whole conflict of the South and North, as a chief, though not sole cause of disunion, and also that the South separated simply because Lincoln's election was a signal that the North had decided not to allow Southern policy any longer to hold the helm of the whole Union. I hold that the South had a perfect right to separate themselves and go their own way. I hold, therefore, that the war is at once entirely a war of independence and not at all a war against slavery, although it sometimes suits the North and still more its English supporters to represent it as such. While the war lasts, therefore, I fully sympathise with the South. So much for the mutual rights and wrongs of the two contending parties. But that is only one part of the matter. I care more for England and Europe than for America. How much more than for all the N word in the world? And I contend that the highest morality requires me to do so. So then this is James Snap. He says, I highly doubt that many Bible-believing Christians would say, let's find the person who wrote that and give him the job of compiling the Greek text upon which we shall base our New English translations of the New Testament. Yet this is what our forefathers did. F.G. Kenyon, in his book Our Bible and Ancient Manuscripts, describes the work of Westcott and Hort as the basis for all subsequent study. New Testament-based text of the NIV, ESV, and LT and NRSV are descendants of and very similar to the 1881 Westcott-Hort compilation. And at the website of the Nestle-Aland compilation, it is affirmed that the text of the first edition of the UBS Greek New Testament, published in 1966, was established along the lines of Westcott and Hort. I'm not sure if anything should be done in light of this information. Perhaps textual critics who do not want to be associated with Hort might consider emphasizing in their reviews of the history of the field the work of other textual critics in the 1800s, such as Samuel Tregelles. Hort's racism does not alter the quality of his research, and it is not as if anything that Hort said was factual because Hort said it. Yet it is saddening to learn that a researcher who was so instrumental in the compilation and promotion of a critical text, which has been the basis of so many English translations, reflected the Holy Spirit's presence so poorly in this regard. I regret that our predecessors in this field and in the church did not detect, rebuke, and correct Hort's racism. And so these guys are all over the place. So Westcott and Hort. And the thing is, I understand Dale Ripley has said things that have been wrong, but not everything. And so that's got to be taken into consideration. These guys need to go through and at least look at what they would consider neutral people like Snap or whatever, what they're saying. Yes, you might not want to go to a King James only thing or whatever, but just if you're going to dismiss all these claims, you have to go to the original source documents and read them. So anyway, let's continue on with what these guys are saying.
And that's been proven, by the way. That goes back to Gail Riplinger's misunderstanding and using the wrong Westcott. I don't know if you remember her making accusations about Westcott and what kind of character that he was. Yeah. And things like that. And people actually backtracked that and demonstrated that she had a wrong individual with the same last name. I don't know if he's been reading Gail Riplinger again or what, but that's just not true.
He makes a lot of her arguments like word for word. And I have some of those documented, but I don't have it in front of me.
Well, again, that's just not true. They were not pro-Roman Catholic. They were pro-Anglican. They were Anglicans. They were from the Church of England. They had their issues with some of the initial texts that were being published that they knew of older manuscripts, particularly we're talking about Vaticanus and Atticus. They had a theory. They ran with the theory. And by the way, this is something that crowd constantly misses up, that today Westcott and Hort is what they believed is how everybody works today in textual criticism. That's just not the case. In fact, we have far more than what Westcott and Hort had. But what's interesting is what Westcott and Hort started an interesting discovery that through the years that more information has come in, the more papyri that were discovered in the 1940s and 30s.
Well, basically the papyri, when you look at what people have said about it, most people are in agreement that the papyri hasn't had a significant effect upon the text. So Westcott and Hort, they've done this huge revamp. They've built this new boat, basically. The papyri are just like, a few little decorative things here and there. They're not really of significant importance, because if Vaticanus and Sinaiticus agree with each other, they're going to go with them anyway. And so against the papyri. And the papyri is only just sort of like, oh, we have this reading here, and they'll try to, say, oh, there's this sort of agreement or this lineage between like Vaticanus and, P75, for example, which is it's been demonstrated that these things are not as close as they claim. They're making out like it's, you can see the DNA there, sort of thing. This is a child of this one, and it's like, no. If you go through the videos that I just recently did of Stephen Boyce interviewing Peter Gurry, I do deal with that issue. And so I'm not sure whether it's the first or second video. You might want to skip through that, but I do read Taylor de Soto's article on that. Or if you type in Taylor de Soto, Stephen Boyce, Vaticanus, P75 and P66, you should come up with that in Google.
Looking at the other manuscripts that were much older than what many of the Byzantine are, some of their theories turned out to be pretty good. Some of them were not entirely accurate, but maybe close to. So nobody today.
Yeah, some of their theories are pretty good. What Lucianic recension, that all basically the Alexandrian readings were gathered together and just burnt, and what we have left is this corrupt Byzantine text. But then when they found the papyri, it's like, hang on, these are filled with Byzantine readings, so that sort of dismisses Westcott and Hort's theory. So it's like, well, then they're sort of right. It's like, no, they were just wrong. And but the TR had been dethroned in academia, and so they just kept running with this false concept. It's like saying, oh, Charles Darwin, he's written his book, and but then they find a whole bunch of stuff that debunks Darwinism, and then it's like, well, we've already come this far, so let's not let the facts get in the way of a good story. In fact, let's just continue on with the narrative.
It goes and says, well, whatever Westcott and Hort put down in the text, that's the reading, that's the one we go with. That's not the case. That's not how modern textual criticism works. But
let's look at what James Snap said again here. He was pretty clear. And at the website of the Nestle-Aland compilation, it is affirmed that the text of the first edition of the UBS Greek New Testament, published in 1966, was established along the lines of Westcott and Hort. And that's one of the things that Kirk DeVitro, he asked Metzger and said, so how did you work with your text? And he said, well, we got the text of Westcott and Hort as our basis, and we worked from there. So it is based upon Westcott and Hort. It's like they're just trying to separate themselves, because what they realize is that Westcott and Hort, they have all this baggage that goes with them. Now, someone like Riplinger, she's written a book about it, and she's found wrong information, but you can't just default to the fact that one person got it wrong and people parroting that wrong information. I mean, there's a lot of pretty stupid, critical text argumentation out there, and it's like I don't put all that on you guys. You know what I mean? Like, if you guys are doing your own research and all the rest of it, I won't go, okay, well, you're exactly parroting these guys, unless you are parroting these guys and going, hey, read James White's book. So, well, do you agree with everything in James White's book? Okay, if you do, then that opens you up to a whole bunch of, Gail Riplingerite type of errors. He makes massive errors in his book. So anyway, let's continue. I feel like I want to click on this button, the website of the Nestle-Aland compilation, because it might go directly to the quote. About online Bibles. No, looks a bit too complicated to find that. So let's just continue with the video.
They did is they were one of the first ones really to think outside of the box, outside of tradition, that they had, and looked deeper and further into history at other things outside of just the ecclesiastical representations. And they actually investigated the documents that existed and came to reasonable hypotheses and published those hypotheses, which were quickly rejected by some of their Anglican friends, like John Burgon, and others who would push back and say, I can't go that far with you. But there was still a mutual respect even amongst them, though they disagree with each other sharply, because they believed that they were slipping in a new text.
I'm not sure how much of Burgon Stephen Boyce has read, but I mean, he was scolding these guys. And even James White says he was a nasty, bombastic character for being so full on about it. So it's like, this whole mutual respect thing. It's like, man, Burgon was pretty anti.
But they were really trying to do investigation on, like, let's get further and as close as we can to
No, let's grab what everyone's rejected. It's in the rubbish bin there, the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, and let's focus on them and reject everything that's been focused on previously. So let's do the exact opposite of what everyone's doing, and let's create a Bible like that. That's what they did.
The times of the writings. And again, some of their theories fell out and were not accurate as time has gone on. Some of them stood the test of time and still work. So there's a big misunderstanding in that group that Westcott and Hort were like these master magicians who still dictate what goes on today. And that's just not true.
We have some people on the live stream. My buddy Jason he's actually from North Carolina, but he's living in California now. He said, has he ever been to South Carolina? Naming a state after a pervert might actually make sense.
Easy now. Some of us are in South Carolina.
Thanks a lot, Jason. We're both in South Carolina here. I'm sure that was a jab at both of us. And then he said that Stalingrad was named after Stalin, and I'm sure he was the most holy of brethren.
Oh, man.
So, yeah. All right. We have Aaron Schmidt also joining us on here. Good evening, bro. Thanks for being here. And I think quite a few other people are jumping on because I just posted it onto Facebook. So let's continue on.
But yet every modern translation, including this one, the English Standard Version, is derived from Westcott and Hort's Greek text.
Not true.
What about this translation? Well, your Bible in John chapter 7, verse 8 says, Jesus Christ said, I'm not yet going up to the feast. The next verse, he goes up to the feast. This version leaves yet out, making a liar out of Jesus Christ. Now, if you want a Bible that makes...
Okay, so I'm not going to get into that issue today. I think I've just gone through about 18 minutes of this. So what I'll do is I'll start this in my next video because I've already gone quite a long time. And so I'll just check and see if there's any comments. Sometimes it's not until I jump on my phone that I see that there are comments. Okay, yes, we have Be Ye Separate. He's written quite a lot here. Debates are risky. Truth doesn't always prevail. Many different factors at play. Yes, and debates should never be the be-all, end-all. They should just be like, okay, that sparks me off into a certain direction. And what I find is people are like, Stephen Boyce won that debate. And it's like, okay, so can you explain to me what I was saying? And they can't because they're not listening to what I'm saying. They're just looking for, someone who appears from the road. It's like, from a distance, it's like, oh, it looks like they've won. Okay, I'm satisfied with it. They're not interested in looking at the details. I'll say to them, have you read my book? Have you read my 200-page book? I can send it to you in PDF for free so you can read it and go through it. And at least then you can accurately represent what I'm saying. No interest. I put that in the hand of James White. No interest whatsoever. Just wouldn't take it. It's like, okay. They're happy with their story, and they don't want those pesky facts to get in the way of their story. So yeah, debates should never be the be-all, end-all. They should just be like, for me, going to somewhere like Wikipedia is a start. To me, going to somewhere like Will Kinney's page, Texas Receptors, my page, or going to KJV Today, that's oftentimes you'll just find an answer there, but that should spark study. That should, I would, if people are struggling with certain things, like just say it was the issue of Daniel chapter 3 verse 25 where it says the Son of God or a son of the gods. I would go through KJV Today. I'd go through Will Kinney. I'd go through anyone else online that I could find, and then go, okay, well, that's a good start, and then branch off from there. Then read, critical text guys and what they're saying, Dan Wallace and a bunch of other guys, and look at what they're saying, because half the time you look at what they're saying and it's like, hang on, that's ridiculous. And many people don't realize how ridiculous some of these answers are. In James White's book or Dan Wallace's material or Bart Ehrman's stuff, Bart Ehrman's like way out there. But yeah, debates should just be, okay, that's got me interested in looking in a certain direction. And I can guarantee that if I could have written a whole bunch of stuff in my book Revelation 16:5 and renamed it to just the Triadic Declarations and pointed to the name of God and not mention James White and not mention critical text or at all and went with the reading of Holy, and they would have gone, wow, there's some really good information there about the name of God. Because what I've found is most people have never even considered that the one who was and is and is to come, or the one who was and is and shall be, is part of the name of I am and part of the name of Jehovah. Most people don't even know that. And so those type of concepts, people are like learning them and going, wow, that's interesting. But then they're fighting against what I'm saying already. It's like um, very few people are coming to this issue of Revelation 16:5 already learned and already understanding the issues of Jehovah, already understanding the issues of I am and how and nomina sacra. They're learning it from me and from Stephen Boyce, and then getting this twist, and then then they're making up their mind and they're contacting me saying you're wrong. So what can you be more specific? Well, I just think your methodology is wrong. So, okay, um, conspiracies are biblical and historical, and that's the thing. It's like just because it's pretty well known that conspiracy theory. This was a kind of slanderous tag that they would put on people who were questioning the government. And so, obviously, with the assassination of John F. Kennedy, there were a lot of holes in the official story, and people were the more they looked into it, the more they were like, hang on, was it really this Lee Harvey Oswald, or was he just part of it? It seemed like there were other people involved, and let's look more into this. And but if you looked more into it, you're a conspiracy theorist. If you look into 9/11, Building 7, you're a conspiracy theorist. It's like there are some things that are so clearly obvious, like say Waco. I've studied that quite a fair bit and what happened to the Branch Davidians. And pretty much the FBI massacred them and blew the place up with tanks and machine guns and CR gas. And people who don't know that, like to me, it's just like, oh, you just never looked into it, or you just believe in the mainstream media. Okay, I can understand that you don't know anything about it. But if you've looked at everything, if you studied it, if you go through it, you end up going, hang on, the FBI massacred those people. And it's cognitive dissonance when people are like faced with that information and they choose not to believe it. And so, but most people are just totally ignorant. And that's what I find. People are very ignorant about these issues that I'm bringing up. They're ignorant about 1 John 5:7, ignorant about Revelation 65, they're ignorant about 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16. Um, they're ignorant about many things. And so sometimes willingly ignorant and blissfully ignorant. The less that they know about something, the better their argument is, because they can just say, well, it's like this, and they don't have to dig through and look at the counter arguments. But yeah, conspiracies, it's just part of life. It's like saying, there's no revolutions or there's no coups. It's like the world is full of revolution and full of coups. Oh, it's conspiracy. It's just this word. It's just like this scarecrow term. It's like King James only, just to scare people away. Oh, it's conspiracy. James White will say conspiracy in his debates because he knows that it's a term that people go, oh, I don't want to be called a conspiracy theorist, so I better not go there. Instead of just saying, well, I don't really care what James White's saying. Is it true or not? If it is true and it is a conspiracy, I have to deal with that. And if people label me a conspiracy theorist, well, so be it. But what I find is a lot of people are gutless. We find that this in the parable of the sower, where people, because of persecution, they fall away, which is another whole thing going against once saved, always saved, but I won't go into that. But it says, they endure for a while, but then because of persecution, they fall away. And I find these people don't fall away and go and go down to the local bars and go down to the strip clubs and go. Many times they fall away and they stay in church and they become leaders and pastors and apologists, and they're just compromised. And so they're like, conspiracies, can't talk about, don't rock the boat, and all this sort of stuff. And they're just very compromised. They just become compromised people. And I call them the don't judge crowd. And I think a lot of these people are like, you can't judge people. It's like, well, the Bible says the exact opposite. It says we're going to judge the world. People don't realize that at the great white throne judgment seat, we're going to be sitting there. Like Jesus is going to be here. I'm going to be there with him and any other believer. We're all going to be there. And the crowd of people who are going to go to hell, we are going to judge them. So, like the whole chick tracks thing of, on the screen, like this is your life and this is how you could live. It's just got, God there and maybe a few angels. No, it's going to be all the Christians there as well, all the believers. And we're going to be judging. It says, don't you know that we're going to judge the world? How much more the things of this life? And that brings everything into a different perspective when if you meet someone and they're non-Christian, they're going to stand before you on Judgment Day. It's huge. And let alone, the Bible is clear. People are like, don't judge, and it's like this Christian Christianity. Don't judge. You can't judge anyone. It's just this progressive Christianity. It's not biblical. And I understand there's a difference between judging people, judging people by their height or their age or the color of their skin and all that. Yeah, that's all wrong. But we're talking about judging with righteous judgment, which Jesus commands. Westcott and Hort's Life and Letters, put out by their grandchildren, has all that. So yeah, that's the thing. It seems like Stephen Boyce, stop with the Gail Riplinger stuff. Go and get Westcott and Hort's Life and Letters, read through it, like say James Snap did, and you'll find a whole bunch of other stuff about racism, about heaps of stuff. Their kids, sorry. Okay, yeah, so you wrote their grandchildren. So it was actually their children. Their revised version was a deception, absolutely. They were supposed to just revise the King James, but they ended up slipping in a brand new, never seen before, Frankenstein Greek text of Vatican and Sinaiticus morphed together, and they squeezed that in, and they've introduced it to the academic world, and then they've spewed it forth onto society, creating huge problems. And they admit as much in their Life and Letters correspondence. Yeah, and that's one of the things where Stephen Boyce seems totally illiterate on this issue. He's like, Westcott didn't hate the Textus Receptus. And it's like, okay, so just, flick through a few web pages and it's like, the vile Textus Receptus, that villainous Textus Receptus. I can't believe it's based on so few manuscripts. We have such older ones. This Textus Receptus is horrible, and I want to, come against it. And this is earlier on in their career. So anyway, I think I'm going to end it there, and we will start roughly about the 18-minute mark on our next video. And so thanks for joining us, guys, with this rebuttal. I don't think there's anything else that I said I would do, but hopefully I can get another video in this weekend, if not through the week sometime. God bless you guys. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for the comments. I'll just stop this one right here.